Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our service of worship this morning. Shall we stand as we sing our opening song? There is no life without you. You have all that we need. Where you are, every fear is broken, and the darkness must flee. Closer and closer, we want to know you. Reaching out, here in your presence, we want to go deeper in your light. Come alive. There is no one beside you. You alone are enough. You fling the doors of our heart wide open, and we're lost in your love. Closer and closer, we want to know you. Reaching out, here in your presence, we want to go deeper in your light. Come alive. Closer and closer, we want to know you. Reaching out, here in your presence, we want to go deeper in your light. Come alive. To you, we will come running in you. We find belonging, your love is all that can satisfy. To you, we will come running in you. We find belonging, your love is all that can satisfy. To you, we will come running in you. We find belonging, your love is all that can satisfy. Closer and closer, we want to know you. Reaching out, here in your presence, we want to go deeper in your light. Come alive. Closer and closer, we want to know you. Reaching out, here in your presence, we want to go deeper in your light. Come alive. Please be seated.
Good morning and welcome to our service, those here in our chapel hall, but also those who are joining us online. It is so wonderful to be with all of you. And it really is so lovely to see you all. I've missed all your faces so much. And there have been exciting things happening here. I mean, there's a whole new look. And I know that a lot of people have been working really hard to make the church look as beautiful as it is. So thank you to everybody. One thing that has not changed has been load shedding. And a glorious spring tea was planned for after the service today, but due to the load shedding, we will be having tea during our service. So we have some hot urns and some delicious cakes and biscuits available. So thank you again to everybody who's made this wonderful treat possible. So a little bit later, we will break for tea, where you can grab some tea and some coffee and some cake and biscuits and things there. And then when Ross begins to play again, that will be our cue to kind of come back and sit. So it's really just kind of grab a cup of tea and come in and sit down again. But please don't abandon your tea. Bring your tea and your cake with you. It's very, very important. We need sustenance for this. So just open with 2 Corinthians 4:18. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. For what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. Stefan will be speaking a bit later on spirit. And for me, spirit is very much like the wind. I can't see it, but I know that it's there. And I can feel it, and I can see its effects on those around me. And I know that there's like a lot of scientific explanations of how wind is formed and how it moves and all of that stuff, but there really is nothing more delicious than a breeze across your shoulders on a hot day. And for me, that really cannot be quantified. Let's open the service in prayer. Eternal God, you are the rock. You are the firm foundation for everything we build. Everything we need is found in you. For those of us who are here feeling broken, bring restoration. For those of us here feeling weak, bring strength. For those who are weeping, bring joy. For those of us here with doubts, bring faith. For those feeling shame, bring freedom. For those of us who come here feeling burdened, bring rest. And for those of us who are feeling anxious, please bring peace. As we meet today, we ask that you would provide wisdom, guidance, and direction. Remind us that everything we need is in you. You are the source of all true joy and lasting love. Nourish our souls. Amen. Another thing that nourishes our souls is tea, and maybe at a push, coffee, but also the unseen phenomenon of friendship and kinship. So let's break for tea now, and remember to listen out for Ross. When we come back during our singing, there will be an opportunity for the offering bags to go around. We'll be taking up our collection then for those who have come prepared. So please help yourselves to tea.
tempest roars, you are with me. When creation falls, still my soul will soar on your mercy. I'll walk through the fire with my head lifted high and my spirit revived in your story. And I look to the cross as my failure is lost in the light of your glorious grace. Let the ruins come to life in the beauty of your name, rising up from the ashes. God, forever you reign, and my soul will find refuge in the shadow of your wings. I will love you forever, and forever I'll sing. When the world caves in, still my hope will cling to your promise. My courage ends, let my heart find strength in your presence. I'll walk through the fire with my head lifted high and my spirit revived in your story. And I look to the cross as my failure is lost in the light of your glorious grace. Let the ruins come to life in the beauty of your name, rising up from the ashes. God, forever you reign, and my soul will find refuge in the shadow of your wings. I will love you forever, and forever I'll sing. Let the ruins come to life in the beauty of your name, rising up from the ashes. God, forever you reign, and my soul will find refuge in the shadow of your wings. I will love you forever, and forever I'll sing. Oh, oh, let the ruins come to life in the beauty of your name, rising up from the ashes. God, forever you reign, and my soul will find refuge in the shadow of your wings. I will love you forever, and forever I'll sing. So let the ruins come to life in the beauty of your name, rising up from the ashes. God, forever you reign, and my soul will find refuge in the shadow of your wings. I will love you forever, and forever I'll sing.
Thank you. Could those helping with the offering perhaps take the offering bags around now while I do the reading, please? Thank you. Stefan, could you just hand the offering bags? Thanks. Reading from John 3, 1 to 8. Now there was a Pharisee, a man named Nicodemus, who was a member of the Jewish ruling council. He came to Jesus at night and said, Rabbi, we know that you are a teacher who has come from God, for no one could perform the signs you are doing if God were not with him. Jesus replied, Very truly I tell you, no one can see the kingdom of God unless they are born again. How can someone be born when they are old? Nicodemus asked. Surely they cannot enter a second time into their mother's womb to be born. Jesus answered, Very truly, I tell you, no one can enter the kingdom of God unless they are born of water and the Spirit. Flesh gives birth to flesh, but the Spirit gives birth to spirit. You should not be surprised at my saying, You must be born again. The wind blows wherever it pleases. You hear its sound, but you cannot tell where it comes from or where it is going. So it is with everyone born of the Spirit.
Okay? Better, thank you. Sorry, it turned itself off just now, and I thought it was my pocket. It was obviously the batteries. Maybe let me begin with my story as I normally just greet everyone, but it's a story about a holy man who needs to have a special shirt made for a special occasion. So he sends his disciples off to see a tailor, and they go and ask the tailor to make the shirt, and the tailor says, God be praised. God willing, I will have it ready for you next week. And a week later, the disciples go back to the tailor, and it's not ready. And the tailor says, God willing, I will deliver it to you in 3 days. And in 3 days, nothing happens. The disciples go back again, and the tailor again says, it's not done, but God willing, I will surely finish it next week. And the disciples go back to the holy man, and he's getting a little bit frustrated now about this, and he says, next time you go to the tailor, would you ask him how long it'll take to make the shirt if he leaves God out of it? God talk. Most of you are aware it's my first service back after 3 months of sabbatical. It's a wonderful gift that I'm given every 5 years. It was put off for a year because of COVID, so by the time I left, I was pretty much at the end of myself, and it really took about a month of not having the busyness and the demands of chapel life to really feel human again. And it was a time just to go and pray and meditate and be and reflect and read. And I began it with a quiet time down in the Eastern Cape, where I also hoped to fish, but the weather always seems to conspire against me. I had rain for half of it, gales for the other half. And so for those who are interested, the big one still remains to be caught. But I did have a wonderful time of road trip where Cassie and I went down to the Eastern Cape, which is really stunning. And we also saw some old friends of ours that some of you may remember, Dan and Daphne Vaughan. But maybe just to take an opportunity to say thank you to you as a church for allowing me to go on sabbatical. It happens every 5 years, as I say, and I do see it as a gift and a privilege to just go away. And I'm also aware that while I was away, that many here on our staff and in the leadership carried a much heavier load as a result of me not being here. So just to say how grateful I am for all of you and what you did. And of course, an important part of sabbatical is to just go and be open to God and to try and hear what God is saying, firstly to me personally, but also to us as a church here at Bedford Chapel. And it's an opportunity just to reflect for me on my spiritual journey and just to ask some very honest questions. You know, how am I doing? Am I feeling connected with God? Does the way I'm living my life, does it allow for time and for space for God to move, to change, to transform me? And are there things that I'm doing or part of my life that are unhelpful, and what would be maybe more helpful in terms of how I live my life? And of course, like all of us, if we look back over our spiritual journeys, there are times where it's really positive and exciting, where we feel so close to God, we're really connecting with God, we're growing spiritually. But there are other times that are much more difficult, maybe frustrating, maybe even painful, where we struggle to feel God's presence in our lives, and maybe we feel a little dry, a little empty, a little tired. And I want to suggest, and I know this is a generalization, but I do think it's true for most, that the last few years have been a very difficult and in many ways a disruptive time spiritually. And mainly because of the COVID pandemic and all the sort of collateral stuff it brought into our lives, turned our lives upside down, has brought a fair bit of frustration and pain and suffering and loss into all our lives to a greater or lesser extent. And on a very practical level, many of the sort of traditional ways that we connected with God and sought God, things like going to church, groups, Bible studies, fellowship groups, centering prayer, although some of them have come back, many have come back, it's not quite the same. And maybe on an even deeper level, what we've been through as a people, as a world, has brought certain questions or raised issues that has forced us to maybe think a little bit theologically, thinking about how do we make sense of this? Where's God in the midst of it all? And how does my faith fit in with all that has happened? And I read an article, I think it was in Christianity Today. It was one of these online Christian magazines, and it shared the experience of many Christians who said that as a result of what's happened, that they're feeling disappointed, they're feeling spiritually wounded, even abandoned by God, and sort of stuck, not knowing quite how to move out of that and move forward in their relationship with God. And one person expressed it in the words, they said feel like they're on spiritual autopilot, going through the motions, but somehow it doesn't feel like it's quite working. And so they're struggling. They're finding themselves less thrilled about going to church, reading the scriptures, praying, or even coming to God. And I think maybe some of you here, and those online, may be able to identify with some of those issues, some of those questions, some of those feelings and experience. And so this morning, what I wanted to do is maybe just to start to ask the question, when we're feeling like that, when we're feeling stuck, or maybe not quite knowing the way forward with God, how do we move forward? How do we find the way to start to rebuild, to refresh, maybe to renew our faith journeys? And I want to do so just by very simply looking at two interactions that Jesus has right at the beginning of the book of John, in John 3 and then in John 4, where he speaks to two different people, very different people, about who God is and how we might connect with God, and also how God is available to us. And hopefully in thinking about that, we'll be able to get a sense of how we might move forward with God and come to God and connect with God. And the first interaction from a very well-known passage, and I'm not going to go into in depth, but it's this interaction that Jesus has with Nicodemus. And we don't know too much about Nicodemus. It tells us in the passage he's a Pharisee, he's a very religious man, and he's also a leader. He's part of the Jewish ruling council. And in John's gospel, we need to understand that Nicodemus, in one sense, is representative of those who are very much in the Jewish establishment, the religious establishment. Not only is he very religious, he's also a leader, part of the authority structures. But along with what we're told about Nicodemus, there's also certain things we can sort of surmise from the passage of what's going on. Firstly, that somehow Nicodemus seems to be truly seeking after something more. You know the U2 song, still haven't found what I'm looking for. Nicodemus seems to be looking for something more. He, as a Pharisee, he would have had this very strict religious observance. He would have, as the Pharisees, had a very formal, very narrow understanding of God. In one sense, they thought that they had God sewn up. And as a leader, Nicodemus would have been looked up to by other members of the other Jews, the other Israelites. And so he would have had to, in one sense, toe that line, be a good Jew. But somehow, even in the midst of that, he's looking for something more. And he recognizes something in Jesus. There's something about what he's seen or heard about Jesus that brings him hoping maybe that Jesus will point him to what he's looking for. But even though he comes and he's drawn to Jesus, there's also a hint in the passage that he's being cautious. You know, he's still hedging his bets. He's not totally convinced. And so he comes, it says, at night. He comes under the cover of darkness. And maybe afraid that if the other Pharisees, the other Jewish leaders hear that he's coming to see Jesus, there might be questions asked. And so he comes under the radar, so to speak. And when he addresses Jesus, we become aware that the thing that has really impressed him about Jesus is the fact that Jesus is doing these signs, healings, miracles. But when Jesus responds to Nicodemus, he doesn't respond to what Nicodemus brings. Nicodemus thinks Jesus is of God because he's doing these signs. But Jesus responds to him in a way that I'd suggest Nicodemus doesn't expect. He doesn't respond directly to what Nicodemus is saying about the external signs, the miracles, the healings. But he seems to respond to Nicodemus' desire to know more of God. And he starts to speak about God in a way that was unusual in terms of the terminology and the religious understanding of the day. He starts to speak about God as spirit. He leads Nicodemus away from the external, the signs, the miracles, to the inward, the invisible, spirit. And he says those that want to be part of God's kingdom need to be born from above, need to be born of the Spirit. And then as Cassie spoke about earlier, Jesus uses this imagery of the wind. And interestingly, in Greek, the word for spirit, the word for wind, and in fact also the word for breath is one word in Greek, pneuma. And so Jesus speaks about pneuma, wind, spirit, which comes and blows. It comes from wherever it wants. It blows wherever it wants. And like the wind, spirit is mysterious. It's powerful. It's unpredictable. It's wild. It's uncontained. It's always moving. You can't see wind. You can't nail it down. You can't catch it in a bottle. You can't domesticate it. That's how spirit is. That's how God is. And for Nicodemus, a man who's very steeped in his Jewish religion, and with his tradition, focused very much on observance and keeping the law, having these rules that you kept. And in that sense, as I said, you had God nicely sewn up. You had God under control. This must have been difficult to hear, what Jesus was saying about God as spirit, difficult to take in. And in fact, if you apply what's known as a narrative hermeneutic to this conversation that happens between Nicodemus and Jesus, what you see is that Nicodemus is slowly withdrawing during the conversation. He starts off, he says to Jesus, I've seen, you must be from God, you're doing all these signs. And as Jesus responds and being speaks of being born of the Spirit. Nicodemus responds and says, well, how can it be possible? How does a man enter into his mother's womb again? And then as Jesus continues to unpack what he's saying here, we see Nicodemus actually withdrawing. And in fact, he doesn't say anything else in this conversation other than the 4 words, how can this be? And then he's quiet for the rest of the time. And in fact, if this is all we heard about Nicodemus in the scriptures, we may even have a sense that he was put off by what Jesus was saying, or maybe it was too difficult for him and that he withdraws. But of course, John does mention Nicodemus again in his gospel. He's mentioned in chapter 7 where we hear that as the Jewish leaders are starting to plot against this upstart Jesus, Nicodemus stands up for him and actually says, maybe we need to give him a fair hearing. And then again in John 19, after Jesus dies on the cross, we hear of Nicodemus going with Joseph of Arimathea and taking Jesus' body down, and he brings a mixture of myrrh and aloes for the burial of Jesus' body. And so it seems that for Nicodemus, this desire for something more of God, that what Jesus reveals of God as Spirit has somehow taken root, and Nicodemus becomes a follower of Jesus, born of the Spirit. But I want to shortly just refer to a second interaction that Jesus has in the very next chapter of John. And it's an interaction I think we're all very familiar with, Jesus' interaction with the woman at the well, where Jesus speaks about God and how we come to God in spirit very similarly to the way that he speaks to Nicodemus. And he says God is spirit, and his worshippers must worship in spirit and in truth. And what I want us also to notice is that John in his gospel is very much wanting to contrast Nicodemus in chapter 3 with this woman that he speaks about now in chapter 4. Whereas Nicodemus represented acceptable Jewish religion. He was sort of someone we would see as in. This woman is exactly the opposite. She's someone who is outside of acceptable Jewish religion, outside of what the Jews believed was acceptable to God. She was a Samaritan, and we also hear not a very reputable woman, a woman who's been married 5 times and is now living with someone who is not her husband. And scholars of John's gospel point out that John very much wants us to see this contrast, that Jesus is speaking not only to those who are in, part of accepted religion, but he's speaking to those who are out. And this message of who God is and who God is interested in and available to is for everyone, whoever you are. And there are also similarities in the very conversation that Jesus has with this woman, because like with Nicodemus, as she recognizes that Jesus is somehow from God, she calls him a prophet. She says, I see you're a prophet from God. But then she launches into this issue, a very external issue of religion. And she brings up one of the religious hot topics of the day. My mountain is better than your mountain. Something that existed between the Pharisees and the Israelites, who had different ideas about which mountain legitimate God worshippers worshipped on. But again, Jesus doesn't answer her question or respond to the issue that she brings up. He instead invites her to turn her focus away from the physical, from the external, physical fixed mountains, and who's in or who's out religious controversy, to something deeper. And he begins to speak to her about God as spirit. And he uses this image of living water, that this living water that is within us, wherever we are, whether we're on this mountain or that mountain or anywhere. And of course, once we realize that this living water is flowing within us, we realize we don't have to travel to that mountain, that it's simply here. And when we find we're thirsty, we can just drink from that life-giving, soul-quenching spring of living water, the water of God, the Spirit of God flowing and moving in our lives. And so this morning I wanted maybe just to remind us of this wonderful truth that Jesus reveals, firstly to this very religious man, who man in one sense was getting it right, in terms of his understanding at least. But also what he reveals to this woman, who was very much on the outside, seen as unacceptable to God. that whoever we are, and wherever we are in our journey with God, and however we're feeling, whether we feel like we've got it all together, or, as I was sharing at the beginning, we're feeling a little bit stuck, maybe feeling dry, messed up, like we're looking in the wrong places and struggling to connect with God, that Jesus tells us God is spirit, and His Spirit is never far away and is never unavailable to us, whoever we are, wherever we are, right here, even right now. And the Spirit, like the wind, like Cassie said earlier, we can't see it, and yet we can feel it blow. We can experience it as it swells up in our lives or blows around us, and we experience it as the Spirit wells up within our lives. And I wanted to just share this quote from Simeon, the new theologian, a 10th and 11th century Orthodox monk, poet, and mystic. And I think he just puts it very well. He says, "When men search for God with their bodily eyes, they find Him nowhere, for He is invisible. But those who ponder in the Spirit, He is present everywhere. He is in all, yet beyond all." And so the challenge maybe to us is, how do we do that? How do we ponder in the Spirit? How might we live our lives in a way that opens us to the Spirit? Or what practices might we follow that bring us to that space where we are open? How might we even pray? How do we move to a deeper understanding? As Jesus is trying to relay to this very religious man, Nicodemus, to this Samaritan woman, how do we move beyond the surface? How do we go to a space where we move beyond religion, beyond observance, beyond controversy, to that still center where God is present, as the mystics tell us, as Kenneth Leach refers to here? And how might we even learn to pray in a way we're not just bringing our shopping list to God, but a way where we become open to God's presence? As Richard Rohr says here, and I just want to read this quote: "Prayer is not primarily saying words or thinking thoughts. It is rather a stance, a way of being present. It is a way of living in the presence, living in awareness of the presence, and enjoying the presence. Presence knows presence. Spirit knows Spirit." How do we live in that space where we are open in our spirits to God's Spirit? We're going to have communion in a moment. I wonder if those serving communion could just come up. And as we receive communion, it's maybe an opportunity, and maybe the music team could come up as well, because we'll serve them at the beginning. But it's an opportunity just to come to God in this moment of communion, which really is a communion of spirit, as we come and we remember what God has done for us through Jesus and on the cross. And earlier we sang that song, "Spirit of the Living God, fall afresh on me." And I want to invite us. The music team are going to sing it again in a moment as we are taking communion. Maybe to listen to those words and to allow them maybe to become a prayer of invitation, a prayer of opening ourselves to God's Spirit and inviting God's Spirit to well up in us and to help us become more aware of God and God's presence with us in the world. Just before we come to communion, I want to read a quote from Thomas Merton, where he speaks about life in the Spirit, and through that knowing God's Spirit present in every moment of our lives, in every person, in everything, in every event. And then we'll pray and go into communion. Life is simple. We are living in a world that is absolutely transparent, and God is shining through it all the time. This is not just a fable or a nice story. It is true. If we abandon ourselves to God and forget ourselves, we see it sometimes, and we see it maybe frequently. God manifests Himself everywhere, in everything, in people and in things and in nature and in events, it becomes very obvious that he is everywhere and in everything, and we cannot be without him. You cannot be without God. It's impossible. It's simply impossible. The only thing is that we don't see it. Let's pray. Father God, as we come to this communion now to remember and celebrate what Jesus did for us, help us to begin to see and to experience more and more, and to learn to live in this wonderful reality of Spirit, of you present in all of our lives and in every aspect of those lives, closer to us than our own breath, that we may grow in our journeys and in our walk with you. May we know you in spirit and truth, around us, with us, in us. Jesus took the bread and the wine. He broke the bread and said, "This is my body broken for you. Take it and eat it." Then he took the cup. He said, "This is my blood shed for you, the cup of the new covenant poured out for the sins of the world. Drink it and remember me."
Spirit of the living God, fall afresh on me. Spirit of the living God, fall afresh on me. Break me, melt me, mold me, fill me, Spirit of the living God, fall afresh, fall afresh, fall afresh on me. Break me, melt me, mold me, fill me, Spirit of the living God, fall afresh, fall afresh, fall afresh on me. Spirit of the living God, fall afresh on me. Spirit of the living God, fall afresh on me. Break me, melt me, mold me, fill me, Spirit of the living God, fall afresh, fall afresh, fall afresh on me. So as we continue in our worship, let us stand together. And as we stand, let us just offer ourselves to God this morning and just say, take all that I have in these hands and multiply them, Lord, as we bring ourselves to Him today. Stand together. Take all I have in these hands and multiply, God, all that I am, and find my heart on the altar again. Set me on fire, set me on fire. Take all I have in these hands and multiply, God, all that I am, and find my heart on the altar again. Set me on fire, set me on fire. Here I am, God, arms wide open, pouring out my life, gracefully broken. My heart stands in awe of your name, your mighty love stands strong to the end. You will fulfill your purpose in me. You won't forsake me. You will be with my life gracefully broken. Here I am, God, arms wide open, pouring out my life gracefully broken. All to Jesus now, all to Jesus now, holding nothing back, holding nothing back. I surrender, I surrender, I surrender.